Here we go. 5 very good reasons why we should all be praying for a Donald Trump win in 2024, and don't expect to hear these on the mainstream media. Number 1, inflation. It's the biggest standard of living killer out there. Take a simple comparison of inflation under Trump. It averaged 1.9%, and under Biden-Harris, 5.7%. So based on that simple spread of 3.8%, the average taxpayer would be thousands of dollars better off a year under Trump. But as we know, inflation is not evenly weighted. A gallon of gas under Trump averaged $2.57. Under Biden-Harris, it's 40% higher at $3.61. Now, if you had the average size mortgage of $405,000, you would save over $15,000 a year in interest repayments alone, aside from being able to pay off the loan more quickly. So how will he spearhead his war on inflation? The push will come from making the US energy independent again, which will drive down energy costs in the US and globally. This will also reduce the massive leverage Saudi Arabia and Russia has over the USA and the rest of the world, as they currently control global energy prices. So with fracking and drilling going full speed, and let's not limit this to oil, he will ignite the US resources juggernaut, creating well-paid jobs and priming the economy with lower costs. What does it mean? Well, cheaper energy, cheaper electricity, cheaper transport for goods and services, less to fill up your car, reduce air travel costs, and cheaper ocean freight, all leading to higher standards of living at home and abroad. Also, ending wars in the Middle East and Ukraine will help to kill inflation. This brings me on to item number 2 on this list: no new wars. Under Trump, there's no way Russia would have invaded Ukraine or Hamas and Iran attacked Israel. He knows full well how to use all the tools at his disposal with a need to engage from a position of power and respect. Importantly, he places weight on personal relationships, which he does have with the ultimate decision makers, the likes of Xi and Putin, all of which I note would show disdain for the likes of Harris. Look at Ukraine, over 1 million killed or wounded on both sides. It's just being fed enough weapons to keep the war going, but not enough to win. Under Trump, the message will be clear: cut a fair deal for peace, or the potential is there to unleash in full the kind of arsenal that will allow Ukraine to win. I just love this next clip. I've used it before and I'll use it again. A great example of Trump's no-nonsense style in negotiating.
President Trump wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but he wanted a conditions-based withdrawal, meaning that you do what we tell you to do, and then we'll start pulling troops back slowly as long as you abide by our rules. It's President Trump and Mike Pompeo, and they are talking to Taliban leadership, and they had one translator in the room. President Trump looked at the Taliban leader and said this: I want to leave Afghanistan, but it's going to be a conditions-based withdrawal. And translator translated. And he said, if you harm a hair on a single American, I'm going to kill you. And the translator goes, and Trump goes, tell him.
Yes.
Tell him what I said. Reached in his pocket, pulled out a satellite photo of the leader of the Taliban's home and handed it to him.
Shut up.
Got up and walked out the room.
As for Israel, Trump had Iran half bankrupted and in no mood to start new conflicts. So with newly found leverage around energy independence, close relationships with their allies, i.e. the likes of Xi and Putin, the threat of real action and devastating enforceable sanctions will have the mullahs keen to avoid escalation. With that done, effort can be spent on rebuilding a way forward for peace and security, and then moving on to getting the best implementation of that next phase for the Abraham Accords. Trump's record speaks for itself. No new wars in his last term, and the one major conflict that was roaring across the Middle East in ISIS was defeated in a few months with the use of American smart military firepower. Now, this brings me to item 3 on this list: strengthening of the US military. During his tenure, President Trump upped military spending by 20%, but he did much more than that. He innovated by integrating military output with economic policy. Arms sales to allies created jobs and locked in ongoing relationships. Key players like Saudi Arabia bought big and stuck with the US brand, and ties were closer. He modernized the nuclear deterrent, which had seen the US falling behind China. He created the Space Force, which is critical. Wars of the future are going to be fought from space. He focused on unmanned, hypersonic, and AI hardware and software integration for future-ready fighting. And if you think it's all far-fetched, check out this clip and see what our adversaries are doing to get a feel for what's going on.
Let's turn now to rising anxieties over a new arms race in space. Courtney Kube has rare access inside an Alabama facility on the front lines, guarding the U.S. against threats from China in orbit.
Growing tensions between the U.S. and China now extending to hundreds of miles above the Earth.
We know when we're threatened. We need to be able to counter the threat.
To get an inside look at some of the latest American technology to counter the Chinese threat, we went to United Launch Alliance's factory in Alabama, working on defenses against things like Chinese satellites that can use robotic arms to drag other satellites out of orbit, meaning China could disable critical American communication satellites.
Scary stuff, though clearly a great idea by Trump to create the Space Force. Now, military dominance is incredibly important to project power, which both China and the US are competing to do. By driving technological advancement, Trump is setting the path for the USA to not only lead, but to create a bigger gap between it and its adversaries. You can bet your bottom dollar that the woke ideology will weaken the US military position. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that the thought of China challenging to win more Olympic gold medals than the US was seen as a joke by most Americans. Without hard work and the right platforms, what was the norm, i.e. the US being the preeminent military power, just as it is a sporting power, can change. And this will affect not only the safety of the US, but the entire world. We integrated a little on economy and tech here, which leads us on to the fourth reason we should be praying for a Trump win, and that's the stock market and economy. A flourishing tech sector underpinned by security, lower taxes, and reduced inflation will pay off big for workers and investors alike. Job opportunities will grow as Trump sets the foundation both locally and internationally for markets to rally, and the 401ks of Americans will flourish as investors on the whole will enjoy great returns. Even Jim Cramer on his Woke Network channel admitted as much.
In the many years I've known Trump, and I know him fairly well, he's been wildly pro-stock market. Always watched it like a hawk. He loved bantering about the stock market. Appeared on the show many times because even though he was in real estate, he enjoyed stocks. When he became president, he graded himself by looking at the Dow Jones average. He often told me there was way too much regulation. He was wildly pro-oil and gas, and although the environment wasn't really an issue for him. Period. Regardless of how you feel about those issues, that's very positive for a great deal of stocks. Remember, again, I said at the top, I'm trying to explain to you what will happen to your money. It's not about friends, it's about money. So if you think that Trump is more likely to be president, the overall tone of the stock market will improve, if only because the man can't bear to see it go down, as the major average of the barometer he uses to measure his own job approval. You may think that's insane, but it's the reality. And if nothing else, hate him or like him, he's good for your portfolio.
The economy piece has a bigger picture tied to it. Under Biden and Harris, the world has been moving away from using the US dollar. This weakens US prestige and leverage on things like sanctions. So under Trump, the strength of the US dollar and its foundation, including global payments, will be bedded down for future generations. And on the tech front, let's not forget the importance that artificial intelligence is going to play. The winner of this race will dominate both economically and militarily. That said, it needs to be a win for the public, and not one where a few players like Google and Meta have a monopoly over what people read and see. To close out this piece, let's hear from VP pick J.D. Vance and what he had to say on the topic prior to his selection as vice president.
Very often, CEOs, especially of larger technology companies that I think already have advantaged positions in AI, will come and talk about the terrible safety dangers of this new technology and how Congress needs to jump up and regulate as quickly as possible. And I can't help but worry that if we do something under duress from the current incumbents, it's going to be to the advantage of those incumbents and not to the advantage of the American consumer.
Okay, we made it to the fifth reason, and to tie this all in, it's quite logical looking at the policies of Trump that American families will be better off. As President 47, he will create an America where patriotism is once again cool and cherished, where wages are rising faster than prices and the standard of living is rising in turn, where the US as a global military power is advancing and not in decline, and respected as a deterrent, not an enabler of war, where technology is used for the betterment of the nation and not to manipulate the masses, where the stock market and economy thrives to improve positions of families, where religious worship is respected and even celebrated, saying things like Merry Christmas will be part of the nation's culture, where the rule of law is respected and illegal immigrants don't hold the country to ransom and populations in fear, where men are noted as men and women as women, not competing against each other in boxing or athletics. Well, I think you get my drift. And finally, where the USA is once again recognized as the land of opportunity for every citizen, regardless of race, religion, or social background. Now, where there are winners, there will be losers to varying degrees. So to even the ledger here, I'm going to close this out by listing 5 losers from a Trump win. Number 1, illegal immigrants. Number 2, China's plans to overtake the US economically and militarily. Number 3, Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Number 4, socialist, woke, and ultra-liberal movements. Number 5, criminals and proponents of defunding the police. Finally, do your own due diligence and vote on the policies you think will lead to a safer, more prosperous America, which I believe filters through to the rest of the world in general. Take care, guys, and see you for the next one.